39 souls set out for Oregon in 1852. They followed the sun across endless prairie. At dawn, the land lay silent and empty. A lone covered wagon wheel lay half buried in sand, its spokes cracked and speaking of broken dreams. A hush lingered over wheel and ruts, mocking their promise. The wind carried a faint creak of wood, as if the wagon itself sighed. Crows circled overhead, their cries echoing across the horizon. Not a living soul remained. No footprints marked a path. No smoke stained the sky. Only a hush answered their fate. Each gust seemed to carry the weight of hopes across white dunes of dust. Something unseen closed in around them in the cold darkness of night. Questions drift like tumbleweed. What wound of evil turned hope into horror? What voice whispered betrayal in the dust? And who will find the truth buried beneath these silent plains? Spring dawns over Independence, Missouri, in 1852, with a promise of new beginnings. Families gather by the wagons, their faces lit with hope, beneath a sky washed in pale gold. Children clutch small bundles of cloth, their wide eyes reflecting dreams of uncharted lands. Oxen stamp and snort, heavy with baskets of food and spare blankets, the dust curling around their hooves like whispered secrets. Mothers smooth kerchiefs over weary shoulders, and fathers haul chests bound with iron, each lock a testament to the faith they carry. Pet goats bleat softly from inside crates, noses pressed against the slats, unaware of the miles to come. Laughter breaks the morning hush as neighbors wave farewell, hands raised against the sun, then drop slowly back to their sides as the first wagon rumbles forward. Wheels creak under the weight of winter stores and summer hopes, carving furrows into the soft earth that lead westward. Each turn of the spoke draws them closer to the promise of fertile fields and rolling valleys, where the plow will carve new furrows in a kinder soil. The prairie stretches beyond the town's last roof, an ocean of grass shimmering in early light. The wind carries the scent of wildflowers and the sharp tang of anticipation. Every pioneer feels the pulse of a new world underfoot, ready to root hopes in alien ground. A map unfolds in the minds of every traveler, tracing 2,000 miles of mountain passes, river crossings, and barren plains. They imagine the Cascade Peaks rising like silent sentinels, white crowns blessing the land they will claim. Campfires will make 8-hour shadows beneath towering pines. Streams will sing lullabies to the restless. They will plant orchards and raise children under skies unscarred by war. Yet behind each victor's stride lurks a spectre of uncertainty. Every crackle of the wagon tongue warns of unseen trials. The sun that warms their backs will scorch their spirits. Blizzards will howl across frozen riverbeds. Starvation will knock at midnight tents. Fever will steal the strongest among them. Their stoic smiles will harden as their feet grow blistered. Their sons and daughters will learn the taste of dust before they taste bread. Still, they move as one caravan of 39, each wagon a heart beating to the rhythm of faith and fear. The leader raises a battered hand, voice solid as the soil they leave behind. Spring 1852, 39 pioneers leave Missouri behind for fertile Oregon. They stacked wagons full of food, blankets, even pet goats, ready for fresh starts beyond the mountains. A hush falls as the final words linger in the chill air, a whispered benediction for dreams and dread alike. What nightmares await them on that endless trail? What shadows will swallow their hopes as the horizon stretches and the earth yawns beneath their wheels? What would you have risked to chase a promise of a new world? If you're brave, subscribe and join us for the next chapter. By midsummer, the Oregon Trail had become a river of dust and wood. 150 wagons crowded the path, stretching as far as the eye could see. The sun beat down on cracked earth. Oxen, slick with sweat, labored beneath their burdens. Their sides heaved in the haze. Wagons ground to a halt where the trail curved beneath mesquite and scrub. Overheated wheels stuck in sandy ruts. Pilgrims sprawled on faded blankets, sipping the last of their water while flies buzzed in hot circles. Children pressed damp cloths to their foreheads, mothers fanned them with feed sacks, fathers propped against broken wheel spokes, staring into the tremulous distance. Every well and creek had run dry. Canteens clinked empty against wooden frames. Tension curled through the line like a silent storm. Arguments flickered at the edges of campfires. Voices rose over the creak of harnesses. Men and women blamed strangers for hoarding water. Rumors swirled that gates of metal boxes held barrels of fresh spring water kept close by traveling merchants. Hunger gnawed at bellies already light with weeks of cornbread and salted pork. A lone wagon carried a butcher's bones, boiled clean of marrow. Every mouthful tasted of dust and regret. Night did not bring relief. The ground cooled slowly under a sky of faint stars. Wolves howled from rolling hills miles away. Every creak of a wagon frame set hearts racing. Whispers spoke of cholera creeping through crowded camps. A child fell with a sudden fever, lips chalky with sickness. Mothers wept beside the narrow tent flaps. Fathers hammered pegs in anxious rhythms. The pioneer dream of lush valleys and rippling streams began to feel like a mirage. Every step forward felt like a betrayal of hope. Wagons edged ahead in fits and starts, wheels biting into baked clay, then spinning uselessly in soft sand. Travelers passed empty bottles hoping to find a smidge of moisture. They found only cracked clay and rattlesnake skins. Each family faced the same question: push on, hoping for a miracle at the next bend, or turn back toward lands already marked by hardship. Desperation sharpened senses and exposed fault lines between neighbors. Some offered aid without a second thought. Others counted every drop of water as if it were gold. Men with rifles kept watch atop the highest wagons, eyes sweeping the horizon for signs of stray buffalo or lurking outlaws. Every silhouette in the distance made hearts pound. The wagon train had become its own world of fear and solidarity. For every argument, there was an act of kindness. When one woman's ox collapsed, a stranger unhitched a spare team. When a young boy wandered toward rattlesnake holes, another family's daughter caught him by the collar and pulled him back. Yet the struggle for survival drove them all to the brink of breakdown. They had come in search of freedom and fresh soil, only to find themselves trapped by their own numbers. As dust storms rose behind them, swallowing the line in swirling brown clouds, they learned how thin the line was between community and chaos. They learned that the wilderness did not negotiate, it demanded respect, and it thrived on the fears and frailties of those who crossed its path. When morning came, the wagons crawled forward again, each axle screeching like a wounded animal. Every mile brought them closer to Oregon's promise and deeper into the peril of their own making. What would you have done when the trail itself stood between you and salvation? The fire snapped and hissed as the emigrants gathered their meager feast beneath a sky heavy with stars. A hush fell over the campers, broken only by the distant sound of hoofbeats and the soft murmur of shifting blankets. Then came the first cough, low, ragged, urgent. Runners burst from the tent, clutching pale faces and trembling limbs. They collapsed at the firelight's edge, gasping for air that would not stay. Fear rippled through the circle, plates clattered to the ground. The smell of charred meat and sweet sage wood turned acrid with panic. Within hours, the curse began. A man who had laughed at morning's light now trembled in the dust. A child's bright eyes dulled to hollow pools. Runners returned again and again, each time slower, each time weaker. By dawn, half the camp lay in fevered delirium. No blade could cut this enemy. No powder could drive it off. A single lantern illuminated a doctor's crude sketch painted years before in a musty study. It showed sunken cheeks, bloated bellies, and rivers of dark liquid spilling from broken lips. Those lines, once academic curiosities, now burned into every mind. The emigrants pressed over it with trembling fingers, tracing the path of ghastly symptoms they recognized too well. Violent cramps seized bodies without warning. Endless thirst hollowed stomachs that could not hold water. Runners collapsed into the dust, limbs flailing against invisible chains. The camp doctor, his hands steady at first, grew gaunt and stained with sweat. He moved like a ghost among the living dead, offering only small comforts, a cool rag, a whispered prayer. Graves multiplied under the veil of night, lanterns swayed above fresh earth. Each shovel of soil fell with a dull thud that echoed like a funeral bell. The dead were laid to rest side by side, emaciated and stripped of hope. 2, 3, 4 at a time, until the rising sun revealed rows of mounds cradled by the prairie grass. Sorrow clung to the survivors like a second skin. Mothers wept beside empty wagons. Fathers stared at broken spokes, their faces carved by grief. Children huddled together, too frightened to sleep. In every whispered exchange, the question lingered: when will the silent wages of cholera claim the next soul? No enemy marched in formation, no sword rang against shield. Instead, a single-celled killer spread like wildfire through crowded camps. It hid in tainted water, in dust stirred by passing wagons, in wounds we could not see. It laughed at our defenses, it ignored our prayers. Yet amid the despair, a fragile resolve took root. A handful of emigrants carried water in cloth sacks, sharing each precious drop by turn. Others dug deeper wells at the camp's edge, risking death to save strangers. At the brink of collapse, the human spirit flared, brief as a candle in the wind, but enough to remind the living why they journeyed west. And so the wagons pressed on, each creak and groan a testament to survival. The prairie stretched before them, indifferent to their suffering. Still, they moved forward, trusting that beyond the next ridge lay fresh air and open skies. They carried with them the weight of those they left behind, and a vow to honor their memory by reaching the promise of a new world. What would you have done when death arrived unseen in the night? Wagons crawled up the sand hills like wounded beasts. Oxen stumbled on brittle grass and sank into dunes that rose like silent waves. Men kicked at empty troughs, their boots sending showers of dust into the scorching air. They had come west for promise, not punishment. Now they stared at cracked hides and hollow rib cages. Their own bellies ached with hunger, but the animals suffered first. A single groan from a fallen ox echoed across the plain. Dust choked the survivors as they gathered around the dying creature. They knelt and offered whispered farewells before moving on. No one dared linger. They broke into their reserves with trembling hands. Hardtack crumbs lay scattered on tin plates, boiled leather peeled from waterskins like soft sheets of rubber. Each taste burned the tongue with desperation. Children chewed small bones, sucking marrow until only powder remained. Parents watched with shattered faces. Every scrap of food had a aim and a story. Now those stories ended. Hunger drove them to madness. A man caught himself eyeing a neighbor's ration. He turned away with a silent prayer. The wind stirred up ghostly ripples across the hills. It carried the scent of death and sweat. Every breath felt laden with salt and sorrow. Survivors huddled under wagon covers, seeking shade that offered no comfort. Their skin blistered and cracked. A woman held an empty cup to her lips and closed her eyes. She imagined water, just one drop. A boy lay beside her, too weak to cry. His small hands drew circles in the sand. Those circles marked time slipping away. Night brought no relief. Stars burned in a pitch-black sky. The dunes glowed silver under a pale moon. Wolves, or something, howled in the distance. The sound crawled into tents and settled under blankets. No fire burned for fear of drawing hungry eyes. Shadows stretched like thin arms over sleeping bodies. Every rustle sounded like an ambush. Every breath felt precious. Even sleep became a risk. At dawn, the survivors counted their rations. 3 days, 2 days, 1 day. Then nothing. They watched the sun climb higher, mocking their plight. Ox carts lay abandoned, wheels half buried in sand. The trail behind them vanished into empty plains. Ahead lay only more hills and empty sky. They whispered of rescue wagons that never came. They whispered of families waiting back home. They whispered prayers nobody heard. A lone rider appeared on the horizon. His horse dragged its head, each step a battle. He carried a small sack of grain, half spilled and mixed with sand. As he neared, hope bloomed in sunken eyes. He lifted the sack high, then faltered. Riders behind him trailed at a distance, their faces lean and blank. They did not beckon. They did not speak. The man raised his voice, but only a hoarse rasp emerged. The crowd moved toward him, stumbling across hot earth. He opened his sack. A single handful of grain spilled onto the ground. Survivors fell to their knees and scooped it up. They cradled the kernels like jewels. Dust covered their hands, but they did not care. They pressed the grain to their lips. They ate it raw, taste of sand and mercy. They tasted hope. But as they swallowed, a raven circled overhead. It let out a single cry that sounded like a warning. Then it dove away into the dunes. They looked at the rider for guidance. He stared back with empty eyes. The grain had vanished from his sack. Only dust remained. He rode off without a word, leaving them with questions that burned deeper than hunger. How could hope arrive empty? How had their last mercy been stolen? The rider's silhouette melted into the waves of sand. The sandhills claimed another day's lives. Survivors stumbled onward, carrying the weight of vanished food and broken promises. They left behind the dying and the dead, their bones bleaching under the relentless sun. Each step felt like betrayal. The trail ahead wavered like a mirage. With every footfall, they questioned whether pressing on meant death or staying meant surrender. Will you face the sandhills when every hope turns to dust? Tension choked the air as the camp gathered by the creek, its muddy banks stained with spilled water and shattered trust. Faces glowed in lantern light, some pale with fear, others flushed with anger. Tents lay torn down, poles splintered as if by an unseen hand. A handful of men argued over the last ration of hardtack, their voices rising above the creek's sluggish murmur. A woman pressed her fingers to her lips, pleading for calm, but the wind carried only bitter accusations. Desperation was a silent predator, stalking every heart. Some blamed the sick, whispering that cholera or fever was their punishment. Others accused the strong of hoarding what little food remained, whispering of secret stashes hidden under blankets. A child's cry cut through the chaos, small and terrified, before it was drowned by the shout. "We trusted each other," someone rasped, "and now we betray our own." By a flat rock at the creek's bend, a council formed in hushed circles. Lanterns swung above bent heads. They spoke of who should guard the wells, who would stand watch, who deserved the last cup of water. Fingers pointed at trembling shoulders. A mother clutched her sick son and backed away, tears slick on her cheeks. No one offered comfort. No one offered mercy. Night deepened. Shadows lengthened across shattered poles and muddy footprints. Campfires sputtered as wood grew scarce. A man slipped away from the council and crept to a fallen supply wagon. He pried open a crate, heart pounding with guilt and hunger. He counted out a handful of cornmeal before tucking the rest beneath his coat. His reflection in the creek looked hollow, eyes rimmed with shame. Dawn cracked the sky with pale pink light. The camp awoke to cold hunger and colder stares. The sick lay huddled on blankets, bodies rigid in fever's grip. Camp guards dragged one trembling figure from the circle and forced him to the rock. They spat on him, accused him of bringing death to their doorsteps. He gasped for breath, eyes wild, as they shoved him into the creek's shallows. Water lapped at his knees. He whispered, "Mercy," then sank beneath the brown surface. Silence fell as the guards dragged him back to shore. His body lay still, lips stained with creekweed. No one rushed to help, no one mourned. The camp looked away. Hunger had turned mercy into weakness. That night, tents were abandoned altogether. Survivors huddled beneath wagon covers, their breaths shallow and cold. The creek's gentle murmur became a cruel lullaby. They spoke of one another in fearful tones, imagining every rustle of canvas as an attack. Some people fled on foot, trusting open plains more than broken campfires. In the blackness, a lone lantern winked near the council rock. A small group gathered there once more, though no one claimed authority. They spoke of gathering what strength remained and pushing onward. They spoke of home and the faces that waited for them in dusty towns. But fatigue and despair muffled their words. The wind swallowed hope before it could take root. When dawn came again, only a dozen souls remained by the creek. The rest had vanished into the dunes, swallowed by fear or sand. Those who stayed packed the last of their supplies onto creaking wagons. They set watch in pairs, hands trembling over makeshift weapons. They left the torn tents, broken poles, and the council rock behind. Their footsteps echoed as they marched away, each stride heavy with regret. They glanced once back over bleeding shoulders at the camp that turned on itself. There lay everything they had built: shadows of tents, pools of water, echoes of betrayal. Before they left the creek for good, one weary man dropped to his knees and scooped up a handful of muddy water. He drank slowly, tasting salt and sorrow. He closed his eyes and pressed a trembling hand to the council rock. "May we never forget," he whispered. The wagons creaked back to life. Oxen groaned and strained as they pulled away from the scene of their collapse. Dust rose in grey clouds, obscuring the broken camp. Behind them, the creek murmured on in mournful rhythm. If you were there, what would you have done? If you're brave, subscribe, share with a friend. In the dead hush of 3 a.m., the camp lay beneath an ink-black sky. The moon carved silver slashes through canvas flaps. A single lantern swung on its rope. It creaked. The wind stirred the dust. A blanket lay gone. Only the lantern burned. Footprints trailed across the moonlit earth. They ended at thin air. No footprints led back. Distant, echoing sobs drifted on the chill breeze. They came and went like a half-remembered dream. They tugged at the mind. Cold dread took root. Under cover of dark, pioneers vanished one by one. Campmates stirred, blinking against the cruel light. They found empty ground where bodies should have slept. They called names into the stillness. Only the wind answered. Search parties tore through tents. They lifted canvas, stared into packed wagons. A faint scuff marked where a foot might have paused. Nothing else. No blood. No struggle. Just the hush of absence. 3 nights passed like a countdown. 2 flickers of the lantern. One last cry unanswered. Old journals spoke of dust devils and restless spirits. They whispered of travelers lost to hungry plains. Yet no map pointed here. No legend warned the living. Some blamed bandits. Others blamed the land itself. A few feared something more ancient. One man sharpened his knife and watched the trees. Another drew a circle of salt around his blanket. A mother held her child close, rocking in silence. Fear was their only witness. By dawn, 2 tents stood empty. 4 chairs sat askew. The camp's heart beat weakly. Survivors huddled around dying embers. They shivered in their own names. No footprints, no bodies, only the wind. What do you think vanished in the moonlit dust? If you're brave, subscribe for more hidden horrors. At dawn, 20 figures huddled around a dying fire, their gaunt faces drawn tight by hunger and fear. The cold clung to their bones as embers sputtered in the grey light. No one spoke at first. Only the wind stirred loose ash across the cracked earth. Somewhere deep in tattered cloth, one among them had scratched a crude map. Its faint lines promised a route still unclaimed by dust. It was their final hope, yet every path they had tried before had proven deadly, and now they faced a choice that would decide their fate. The map was frayed and stained, its ink smeared by sweat and tears. It traced a ribbon of track cutting west toward distant hills where survivors whispered of water and shelter. Under the weak sun, they passed it hand to trembling hand. Each traced the scratch where a river might flow. They saw no water, only the spectre of thirst. Starvation had hollowed their vision and sharpened their senses. They saw mirages where none could exist. Still, they clung to that sliver of hope. For weeks they had staggered across bone-white plains. They carried the weight of the fallen on their backs. Each footstep left an echo of despair. Disease had claimed some early. Others had slipped into madness beneath the merciless sky. Only 20 remained. They remembered laughter, remembered waking to soft rain instead of dust. They remembered letters left unsent and the silent fields that swallowed every promise. They had marched toward a bright horizon. Now that horizon lay barren. At dawn they gathered for a final council. Starving, terrified, they formed a circle around the last embers. Voices trembled as they spoke of splitting the group. Half would follow one fork, the rest would hold fast. They spoke of rationing the final crust of bread, of rationing the last drop of water. Words tumbled, some begged to flee alone, others pleaded to stay together. The fire hissed as ash drifted like questions. The choice was a blade in their hands. To split meant forsaking strength in numbers. To stay meant courting slow death by thirst and cold. Yet a divided group carried a chance that some might find help. Their jaws clenched around the moral weight of that decision. They remembered every face lost. They remembered the empty wagons left to drift in the dust. With each memory came a fresh ache. One by one they rose to cast their votes. A woman whose husband had collapsed voted to stay by the fire. A man bearing a child's weight on his back voted to go. A soft voice urged caution. Another, raw with grief, urged a Kishan. The tally fell like stones dropped into a silent well. In that moment they sealed their fate, no turning back. The other pioneers plunged back toward the old trail. They relied on sun and North Star and half-remembered signposts. They marked broken branches and scratched bark. They hoped to reunite with supply wagons at a distant river crossing. But the river had dried. Its bed gaped open. Bridges had rotted. No one had passed this way for months. Only rusted tools remained. They pressed fingers to their lips in sorrow. They spoke only in whispers. Night brought cold and more questions. Neither group saw smoke from distant chimneys. Neither group heard a warning bark. Neither group found a single kind face. The world had closed around them. The land had shifted from frontier to tomb. They mutated from pioneers to survivors. They clung to will alone. Some days they marched in single file. Others they staggered and collapsed. They became part of the dust. They tasted it on their tongues. They carried it in every broken bone and blister. Their names faded just like their tracks. Desperation drove them onward. A single clue might save them. A cabin, a family, a spring. They scoured every ridge. They probed every hollow. They forced themselves to hope. But hope became a double-edged blade that cut deep when it broke. They recorded their last days in makeshift journals. They pressed ink onto stolen scraps. They documented every despairing moment for any reader who might come after. Their hands shook with fever and thirst. Their letters remained sealed in wind-blown envelopes. As seasons changed, the earth bore witness to their plight. Summer's heat gave way to biting frost. Snow drifted in silent waves. The western route froze into a grave. The return path sank into mud and mire. Cattle perished, wagons snapped at their axles. Only echoes of human suffering remained. The wind whistled through naked skeletal trees. Time lost meaning. Days merged into nights. Nights blurred into disu. Reams filled with dust and shadows. They remembered what they left behind. They forgot what lay ahead. Half the group struck west across empty plains. Half turned back toward Missouri. Neither party sent word home again. Their fate became legend. A whisper among later wagon trains. A warning carved on milestone stones. Their story faded into rumor and dust. Their spirits remained tethered to the lonely skies. And every time you cross those plains, you walk between two worlds. Which path would you choose if you stood at the same crossroads? If you're brave, subscribe for more forgotten horrors. Search parties rolled out at dawn. Wagons creaked over frozen earth. Scrap banners reading "Help" fluttered on makeshift poles. The wind snapped at torn cloth. Each banner was a plea swallowed by emptiness. Riders scanned horizons. Dust rose in sudden gusts. They found nothing but footprints fading at the horizon. They felt the weight of every unanswered cry in their bones. 3 nights later, towns whispered rumors of cannibalism. Lantern light danced on rough faces in taverns. A barmaid swore she heard ghostly cries echo through the rafters. Another claimed to glimpse pale shapes moving beyond candle glow. Newspapers blared the tales. Headlines shrieked of missing pioneers turned prey. Clippings blew across desks and hardwood floors. Ink ran where tears fell. Search parties pressed on through tangled sagebrush. They cut heartbeats into every mile. They uncovered scattered bones half buried in red clay. Rib fragments lay twisted like broken dreams. Tattered journals lay open on stone slabs. Pages bore shaky entries and frantic scrawls, ink smudged where rain had fallen. A lone word spilled across a page. When? No context. No comfort. One by one, teams reported back, voices hollow and eyes haunted. They spoke of footprints circling back on themselves. They spoke of journals that warned of hunger's final shape. They spoke of clues swallowed by time. They spoke of a silence more terrifying than any scream. Officials tried to file the reports away. They labeled them myth. They claimed remorse. But every buried bone and torn page whispered another story. 4 search parties vanished entirely. Only empty camps remained. Pots sat cracked on cold embers. A lantern swung in still air. No smoke rose from wood. No footprints led back. No echoes answered the calls. The wind carried faint sobs. The wind carried broken promises. The wind carried shadows that crouched just out of sight. Rumors swirled like vultures. They twisted fact and fear. They grew legs of their own. They took flight on every gust. They roosted in dark corners of saloons. They perched on wagon axles. They nested in every mind. Some survivors confessed to acts they could not name. Some swore that hunger spoke to them in voices not their own. Hunger spoke in tongues that promised salvation or damnation. One tattered journal ended mid-sentence. The ink bled a final stain. No name signed that page, just a prayer scrawled in trembling script. Don't let it live. The page folded over itself like a broken wing. The searchers treated it like a relic. They buried it with solemn hands. They hoped the earth would keep its secrets. 3 months passed before any new clue surfaced. A stray rider found a fragment of dress caught on barbed wire. A single button lay nearby. It bore no name, no design, just a dull gleam. It spoke of women lost in plains. It spoke of children torn from hope. It spoke of something waiting beyond hunger and fear. Ghost stories grew by firelight. They grew with every retelling. They grew in every whispered hush. They became cautions for late travelers. They became warnings carved on wood. They became the legacy of the vanished. They became the tether between past and present. Search parties dwindled. Rumors hardened into legend. The world beyond turned its gaze away. The plains reclaimed their dead. The wind erased every trail. The dust fell in silent layers. The bones lay hidden beneath the prairie grass. The journals lay rotting under endless sky. And still the wind moves through broken wagons. And still the banners tremble on rusted poles. And still the ghosts of rumors swirl at dusk. Who will follow them into oblivion? And who will dare to uncover the truth? Will you speak their names, or let the legends go untold? They found the diaries in a hidden chest under the oak floorboards of the empty farmhouse. One was small and wrapped in faded blue cloth. The other lay in scuffed brown hide. Both were stained with a red so deep it curved the leather and whispered of blood. They cracked when opened. Yellowed pages spilled free. A child's shaky handwriting traced every line. Weak ink trembled in the candlelight. The stale air reeked of old sweat and fear. The chest sat in a silent room. The only movement was the oil lamp flickering, exposing forbidden pages. The smaller diary held only 17 entries. Each one detailed the day's chores and whispered fears. She wrote of footsteps behind closed doors. She wrote of soft sobs echoing down empty halls. She wrote of a warning left in a kitchen corner. And then she stopped mid-sentence. The ink welled under her pen. The page cut off as if someone snatched the words away. No closing farewell, no signature, just a blank line trailing to the edge. That unfinished thought became a razor of dread. We read her last fragment like a prayer, unanswered. The larger journal spanned more days. Her hand grew steadier. She mentioned laughter in the yard. She sketched faces she could not name. She drew a child's toy wagon half buried in dirt. Each sketch looked alive. She spoke of voices carried on the wind, of doors that opened of their own accord, of moonlight that cast no shadow, and then a final entry. We hear them calling. 3 dots. The rest was gone. No footnote, no echo, just those words smeared in thick red. Historians dusted for fingerprints on the covers. Forensic teams passed findings from gloved hands. Specialists tried to date the ink. They found traces of iron and soot. They found a child's DNA in a furious corner stain. They searched the entire house. They mapped every creak in the floor. Scholars argued over each fragment. Some claimed the diaries proved a secret ring. Others insisted they told only of lost hope. None could explain why only those 2 books remained, why every other document vanished, why these lost voices surfaced in blood and silence alone. The toy wagon sat at the edge of her final sketch. Tiny wheels carved tracks in her drawings. In the dusty corner of the room, the real wagon lay abandoned. Its red paint chipped, its handle bent. It smelled of dust and old tears. A faded doll head lay beneath it. When placed beside the diaries, it seemed to lean toward them. It whispered of children who once played here. Its hollow frame echoed with laughter that no longer came. One investigator rocked it. It rattled across rotten wood. There was no reply, only the memory of small hands long gone. Eyewitness sketches formed another kind of diary. A tired neighbor recalled pale shapes crossing the yard at dusk. He drew them in charcoal on linen scraps. A nurse remembered silent children watching from windows. She sketched their haunted eyes in shaky pencil lines. Forensic artists noted indentations pressing through the cloth. No one dared look at those drawings for long. The images blurred when you blinked. The shapes held more truth than any report. They showed bent shadows standing at the gate. They showed wagons moving without wheels. They showed pockets of air where a child should be. Each sketch felt alive and hungry for answers. In her imagination, she was alive again. The journals gave her voice across time. We heard her pen stumble on the page. We saw her ink bleed when she shivered at night. We felt her breath in the margins. We heard doors creak in her empty hall. We heard whispered warnings not meant for her eyes. In one entry, she begged forgiveness for breaking a toy wagon. In another, she confessed a fear of footsteps on her roof. In one line, we traced her fingerprints on the edges. Each confession dripped sorrow. Each phrase cut like glass. We read her pain as if it were a fire burning alone in the dark. The diaries hinted at something darker, a name scrawled in code, a letter addressed only to the lantern-bearer, a map drawn on a scrap, a secret meeting at the old barn. They named places that no one visited anymore. They referenced keys kept in a locked drawer. They spoke of children led away in wagons painted red. They warned that mercy meant chains. They foreshadowed a deal struck on a moonless night. They pointed to a group of men who vanished in winter. They whispered of a forbidden route through whispering pines. Each coded line felt like a lock undone. Each lock revealed more horrors. These diaries became our guide. We followed splintered clues. We tracked coded pages to abandoned roads. We searched for the lantern bearer. We knocked on locked doors in the dark. We dug through barns and cellars. We asked every surviving neighbor. We read every ransom note that turned out to be blank. We listened for footsteps in empty rooms. We watched shadows move when no one walked. We chased our own fears. We confronted our own doubts. We discovered no neat end. We only found more questions. Who wrote those words? Why did no one save them? Who still hears the call? Now we hold their stories in our hands. We hold the blood-stained pages and the broken toy. We hold the sketches drawn by those who saw too much. We hold the echo of footsteps down empty halls. We hold the ghost of a child's whisper. We hold every question burned into paper and flesh. We do not pretend to answer. We only invite you to read. We only invite you to look closer. We only invite you to listen. We only invite you to remember. These stories demand to be heard. They demand justice beyond the dust. What truths will you unearth as you explore these pages? Today, the wind ripples over the prairie like a living thing, tracing every blade of grass in silent waves. Modern hikers pause before a weathered stone marker, its inscription worn nearly smooth by time and weather. Their breath hisses in the thin air as they wonder what hands once carved those words. A drone pulls back, revealing an endless sea of amber grass stretching to the horizon. No fences. No fences. No fences. Just grass and sky. Beneath their boots, faint hollows hint at tents that once stood here. Embers of campfires, long cold, lie hidden under decades of dust. No monument stands tall. No graves mark the ground. Nothing but an unmarked stretch where 39 souls vanished into the wind. They ask why no one knows their names. Hey, ask why no one buried them with the dignity they deserved. Historians comb through diaries and sketches, piecing together fragments of hope and fear. They find a ledger that ends with crossed-out names. They find letters never sent. They find bones bleached by sun and sand, yet none fit into neat rows in a cemetery. Instead, the earth claims them as part of itself. Grass grows over their tracks until even vultures drift past in search of fresher haunts. The prairie holds its secrets close, whispering them only to those patient enough to listen. We imagine families loading wagons and children waving from wooden porches. We imagine laughter that once filled these plains. We imagine dreams of new starts under western skies. Then the images fade. Dust swallows every cheer. Dust swallows every tear. Dust buries every footprint until only the prairie remembers. And the prairie draws breath like a giant spirit, inhaling their stories and exhaling silence. Archaeologists sweep metal detectors across flat ground. They uncover iron pots and broken glass. They uncover buttons from coats and buckles from harnesses. One by one, these artifacts speak of lives lived and hopes broken. A bent spade tells of a hurried grave. A rusted spoon tells of a meager meal. A child's shoe sole tells of endless walking through dust and despair. Each object becomes a voice. Each voice demands that we remember. Local legends speak of ghostly cries at dawn. They speak of lanterns bobbing on the open plain where no camp should stand. They speak of a distant song carried on the wind, a lullaby twisted by sorrow. Hikers claim they feel a presence at their heels. They claim they hear a whisper say, "Keep moving, keep moving." Even the birds seem to circle higher, wary of unseen watchers below. At dusk, the sky ignites in cruel beauty, pink and gold and crimson, then collapses into night, leaving only darkness and stars pinned like silent witnesses. In nearby towns, descendants of survivors keep vigil. They light candles in empty chapels and pray for lost souls. They tuck faded sketches into family Bibles. They tell stories to children who laugh with wide eyes. They tell them, "Remember this place, remember what happened here." Yet those tales fade as years pass. New faces arrive with new names. The prairie remains unchanged. It cannot forget. It does not forgive. Scientific teams set up cameras to capture the shifting light. They record temperature drops that come without warning. They record footprints that appear after a storm, only to vanish again at sunrise. They record eerie pulses of radio static. Engineers scratch their heads over readings that defy explanation. They pack up equipment and warn colleagues, don't stay after dark. But the Prairie answers only with more questions. We drive through stretches of highway that bisect this land. Farm trucks rumble at dawn. Cyclists pedal past. Tourists snap photos of golden waves under blue sky. Few look closely. Few pause to read the small plaque at the roadside pull-off. Most move on to summer homes and weekend getaways. They carry fresh air and open roads in their memories. The Prairie holds out a hand that feels empty to passing eyes, but full to those who know its stories. Researchers comb through government archives for letters sent west. They find grainy photographs of wagons at crowded camps. They find telegrams asking for reinforcements. They find medical reports of cholera and starvation. They find records of accused thieves and blame cast on the weakest. They find notes that end with "not responsible" and proceed at own risk. They find names listed as missing, then removed, then forgotten. Yet in every document, a tremor of fear remains. In every line, a question hushed by bureaucracy. One graduate student maps the vanished routes on a digital screen. Lines crisscross like fractures in glass. Each intersection becomes a point of dread. Each dead end becomes a turning back into deeper desolation. She zooms in on a stretch called No Man's Hollow. She traces the words with her finger. She imagines feet pounding through clay and dust. She imagines faces gaunt from hunger. She imagines hands lifted to the sky in silent prayer. And she feels the hush of history pressing on her shoulders. Journalists arrive with cameras and recorders. They interview reluctant locals who speak in hushed tones. They film empty horizons and tilt to the marker weathered by wind. They narrate facts and figures. They add music that swells and fades. And they edit their stories into tidy segments with definitive endings. Yet the Prairie refuses to be edited. It refuses to conform to soundbite conclusions. It continues to breathe and to whisper. In libraries, readers pull old editions of newspapers. They find sensational headlines proclaiming miracles and massacres. They find letters to the editor begging for mercy or vengeance. They find illustrations of skeletal trees and wagon wheels. They find poems written by camp survivors. They find advertisements promising fresh land and gold. All side by side, they paint a picture of hope undone. Each page stains the reader's fingertips with dust and grief. Tonight, as the sun dips and shadows lengthen, hikers light campfires near the marker. They bring toasted marshmallows and thermoses of hot cocoa. They laugh and share ghost stories. They dare each other to walk into the tall grass. They dare each other to call out names of long-lost pioneers. They dare each other to keep going beyond the firelight. And when their lanterns flicker out, they hear their own names carried on the wind. They quicken their pace back to the glow. They do not look back. We do not either. We only listen. We only remember. We only pass on what the Prairie taught us, that some stories are buried but never dead, that some deaths leave echoes in the grass, that dust can speak if you take the time to hear it, that history is not always written in stone. Sometimes it is carved in silence and shadow. Sometimes it lives only in whispered names carried by the wind. What questions will you ask when you stand before that faded marker? If you're brave, subscribe and follow the path into the dust. Silence blankets the trail that once carried dreams across the open plains. Dust clings to every memory and transforms beauty into despair. The sun rises cold and pale over nothing but grass, grass that hides hollow hollows where wagons stood like sentinels. Wagons that rocked under starless skies. Wagons that bore blankets frayed by hope. They bore food measured in precious mouthfuls. They bore infants bundled in cloth. They bore letters written in trembling hands. Those letters slipped through despair to distant homes. They whispered of green valleys beyond the mountains. They warned of death riding the wind. They begged for relief at every dawn. They pleaded for more water. They begged for the simplest mercy, They asked if God still watched over lost souls. No reply came. The wind answered only with emptiness. That emptiness stretched to the horizon. It stretched farther than any eye could see. It whispered of 39 lives left behind. It whispered of families torn by fear. It whispered of prayers unanswered. It whispered of bargains struck in desperation. It whispered of night marches under leaden moonlight. It whispered of wolves circling silent camps. Some survivors swore they heard voices chanting. They spoke of shapes carved from shadow. They spoke of silhouettes drifting behind tents. They described glowing eyes at the edge of firelight. Some saw cruel reflections in puddles of rain. They saw faces that were not their own. They felt hands grasping at their ankles. They felt breath on their necks at dawn. They woke to the crack of rifles fired without warning. They ran into the dust and found no one there. They called names into the night. They called for friends who once stood beside them. They called for strangers who vanished at sunrise. They found only their own echoes. Those echoes grew louder in empty canyons. They could not escape the echoes. They carried the echoes on every path. They carried the echoes across the desert. They carried the echoes into their restless dreams. Morning brought no solace. Morning brought no new faces. Morning brought no safe ground. Morning brought only the ache of loss. They dug graves for the fallen. They carved crosses in frozen earth. They marked each grave with a name. Then the wind erased their handiwork. Then the wind erased their tears. Then the wind erased their footprints. They folded their tents. They broke their wagons. They scattered into 4 directions. They walked until the dust swallowed them whole. Search parties came on horseback. They came with rifles and grief. They came with hopes of rescue. They returned with bones and rusted pots. They returned with tattered shoes and broken harnesses. They returned with journals whose final lines trailed off into obscurity. They returned with accounts of horrors never spoken aloud. Each story grew wilder than the last, each claim more impossible than the one before. Some townsfolk swore they saw figures dancing above the dunes. Some claimed they heard children singing songs in dead languages. Some felt a chill pass through crowded saloons. Some felt a presence in crowded church halls. All agreed on one point. They agreed that chance could not explain these vanishings. They agreed that something deeper had taken root, that something grew in the silent spaces between stars, that something thrived in the hush after every storm, that something thrived in every crooked tree, that something thrived in every broken wheel. Modern visitors photograph the ruts in the earth. They measure every length of iron track. They run cameras through abandoned campsites. They sift through bone fragments under ultraviolet light. They test samples of dust for ancient DNA. They test wood splinters for hidden blood. They record temperature swings that defy reason. They record magnetic readings that refuse explanation. They set up sensors in empty hollows. They wait for a flicker of movement. They wait for a whisper in the static. But all they capture is silence, a silence so complete it feels alive, a silence that pulses like a heartbeat, a silence that seems to watch. Local historians gather in dusty archives. They pin up sepia photographs on walls. They mark faded maps with colored chalk. They trace lines to cabin ruins and rock outcrops. They debate the merits of each witness. They argue over the reliability of each journal. They reject superstitions and scandalize facts. Yet they cannot settle on a single theory. Each theory yields contradictions. Each theory uncovers fresh horrors. Each theory deepens the unknown. Descendants of survivors hold quiet vigils. They place flowers on unmarked ground. They whisper prayers at dusk. They light candles in empty fields. They speak names no one else remembers. They keep the memory alive. They teach children to respect dust. They warn them not to follow fading footprints. They teach them to listen to the wind. They teach them to honor absence as presence. Every summer the prairie grows green again. Every winter the prairie turns white with frost. Every sea, Aeson, the mystery endures. Every year more layers are laid over the truth. Every decade more dust gathers on the trail. Yet some insist on returning. Yet some insist on listening. Yet some insist on asking the unanswered question. That question hums beneath the stars. That question flickers at every campfire. That question drifts on every breeze. That question blooms in the hearts of the brave. And now we pass it to you. Will we ever know their fate? Comment below with your theory and subscribe to chase the next ghost on America's forgotten frontier.